our executive forum on aligning compliance, culture, and performance. My name is Dave Mayer, and as the Director of Marketing here at Eli, I will be your host for today. But again, so grateful to spend this time with you. In preparing for this, I went over the registration list, and I was so impressed with the range of roles and titles that are here. We've got people obviously from HR, compliance, legal, learning and development, talent acquisition and retention. That's not too terribly surprising because, as we all know, culture affects everyone at any given organization, but those roles in particular are the most engaged with supporting it and promoting it and safeguarding it. So I think that our panel today will have great insights to share with you, and I'm excited for us to move forward with it. As I mentioned, that's what we're talking about, the intersection of culture, compliance, and performance. We do have a great panel to join to speak with us today, and they're going to be sharing practical perspectives. We're trying not to focus on trends or theory. We want to talk about what's really happening, some of the real world experiences that they're working on, some of the things they're trying, some of the results they're seeing, some of the challenges that remain unmet. So we're so happy to have their perspectives here. The whole idea of this is to be a bit of a discussion, not just a lecture. And so we're happy to include your voice in that as well. So to start us off, China, if you could throw up the first poll. We have 2 poll questions for everyone today. First off, I think we're all familiar with the Zoom platform, and we're very excited to get your perspective in this. In addition to responding to this and one more poll question at the end, we would very much love to hear any questions that you have. Just to make sure that we're reflecting the concerns or the experiences that are top of mind for you. So if you can, please use the chat feature to drop in a question at any time during the panel discussion or the event itself. And at the end, we'll have an opportunity to go around all of our panelists and share their perspectives on those questions. One last thing is that if there are any questions that don't get addressed, we will be happy to include them in the follow-up, which will be sitting following the event, which will include some other helpful items as well. Now, if we can, let's take a quick look at the agenda. Thanks so much, China. We're going to start us off with a quick opening statement from Steve Paskoff, who is Eli's founder and chair, and that's going to be a great opportunity to hear some wonderful perspective from someone who has been working in this arena for quite a while. I think it'll be most helpful for us. Then we'll do a quick introduction of our featured panelists, after which we will get into the panel discussion itself, which I'm looking most forward to. And then lastly, we're going to get into the Q&A from you guys, and I really, really hope to see some great questions from. So next up, I want to introduce Steve Paskoff, who will be kicking us off today. As the founder and chair of Eli, he has a great background and tremendous perspective to lend to this. Steve actually started his career with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission as an investigative attorney. He was clearly focused on compliance, working with organizations who were running afoul of the various compliance laws out there. He had a good career in that, and then he moved on into private practice, and then moved into founding Eli. He founded Eli based on the understanding that compliance isn't enough, and to truly optimize your workforce and get the best results, you need to have more than just a compliant workplace. You need a civil, respectful, and focused workplace that doesn't have the disruptive behaviors that often fall within the legal realm, but certainly aren't conducive to good working. So with that, I'll hand it over to Steve Paskoff.
Thank you, Dave, and thank you everyone for attending. We're delighted that you're here. I decided we're going to be talking about some of the values of behavior, and I've got to speak up to Dave and just respectfully add 2 elements. Number 1, I started my career, yes, as an investigator with the EEOC, and I started it, I'm just going to be honest, it was 1973. That's when it started. I joined the EEOC as a trial attorney, responsible for enforcing and investigating individual and pattern and practice cases here in Atlanta. And then I joined a law firm where I actually defended employers and did that for 10 years, last 4 as a partner. And what I want to do is to talk about the evolution that we've had here at Eli, that you're probably experiencing, and one that I personally had that really did shift my behavioral focus, as Dave indicated. As I'll say in just a couple of minutes, it was a little bit more than immediate when I started the business. Now, first, We are living, let's just say it overall, in challenging times in our workplaces. What is challenging? Let's just say there are a lot of external issues going on and leave it like that. But in our workplaces and outside, they deal with characteristics that can be explosive because they're personally meaningful. And sometimes they can tear us apart when they should be bringing us together in a way linked to what we do at work. What am I talking about? Some of the things that are pulling us apart when they can bring us together are things like religion and race and sex and age and national origin. And I must say also political differences, which embrace all of them. Now, what we're going to do is, as Dave said, is talk about aligning culture and compliance and performance. Culture, I believe, is largely behavioral and based quite often on habits. That's one thing. Compliance deals with statutory regulatory conditions. And of course, blending the two, which we believe is vital, is something that can affect performance in a positive way. It can also not be done and have the opposite effect. Just one little hint to something that has changed my views a lot. And then I'll go directly to a story that I'll tell you, which I'll keep short. When we work in an organization, there are commonalities that should bind us culturally. We should share the same mission, the same values, behaviors that build culture. And that is because they should also involve common standards of behavior and treatment. And that commonality puts us all, so to speak, on the same team. That's what happens in the military. It's what happens in sports. In many other enterprises, it can happen at work as well. Now, when I started off, I thought the worst thing that could happen in an organization was a legal claim. I started off working with hospitals, and I'll never forget that one of the times when I did a healthcare specific presentation focused only on the law, someone wrote in the evaluation, and here's what that person said: why didn't you talk about incivility or uncivil behavior or rudeness or abusiveness? And I remember thinking in my suit and my tie, keeping quiet as I read this, doesn't this person, with all due respect, realize that only the law matters? Who was wrong here? I was. And the healthcare analogy has affected my entire life since the early 2000s. Here's what happened. Here's what really brought that home to me. I was hired to work with an organization, a great hospital, not in Georgia, and I won't tell you where it is or who it was. I'll call it Hospital X. I was asked to work with a group of cardiac surgeons. Brilliant, but there were two who had behaviors that were an issue. Their technical skills were great. Their behavioral skills were substandard. They would scream and yell and embarrass and diminish people around them. Anyone who knows me knows that the story is that when I and another colleague talked to people, we heard things like this. A nurse who said, when I asked, what's it like to work for these two? It's like living over and over the worst day of my life over and over. I can't concentrate. I can't focus. I can't do my work. When I asked the person sitting next to her what it was like, she said, it's not a problem. And I said, why is it not a problem? It's simple. What is it? I said, I just told the chief of surgery I'll quit and enlist and go to Iraq and Afghanistan or both. I come from a military family and I'd rather be over there than working in the operating room. So it's not a problem. I talked to anesthesiologists who told me that there were times that they would not intervene in the midst of problems as soon as they'd like, because they thought both of these surgeons separately, of course, would scream and yell and disrupt everything, and it would be worse. The organization knew about this, but for a variety of reasons, some cultural in their own way, would not change it, would not fix it. And let me just say that when you read the literature, and I know I have one of my colleagues who's from healthcare and probably some in the audience, you know that those things cause fatalities. complications, and can harm patient care. The same can happen in other business contexts here. So what we want to talk about is how do we work to build cultures where in your own worlds, that's not what's happening. It involves factors that we'll hear about, an organizational commitment beyond just words, regular reinforcement, and commitment and reinforcement are what you see in business initiatives. We have training, we have policies, we have standards. So did Hospital X, some of the best I've seen, and posters all over the place there that I still remember. Consequences from rewards to discipline or separation, things like that have to be considered. And in every survey, that article I read most recently from the Harvard Business Review, talk about the vital need for measurement. We want to hear from our distinguished colleagues about the experiences they have. They're from wonderful organizations that we know quite well, and they can help crystallize this, and we hope you'll leave with some useful takeaways and answer, we hope we do, any questions you might have. So Dave, with that said, I'll turn it back to you as we move forward with this great session.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And yes, a very clear and scary example of why culture is much more crucial than mere compliance. And with that, I'm very excited to introduce today's featured panelists. Starting off alphabetically, we have Chris Bartlett. Chris is the Vice President of Global HR Operations and Service Enablement at UPS. He's had a very broad career spanning operations, employee relations, communications, as well as HR leadership. With all of this experience overseeing the HR technology, compliance, and service delivery, I'm very excited that he's going to bring a very practical perspective on embedding accountability and culture into your day-to-day business operations. So welcome, Chris. Next up, we have Patrice Beeman. She's the Senior Director of Global Learning Delivery at Coca-Cola. She has an extensive experience with the organization, and that's a pretty diverse organization at that. Currently, she leads the global learning delivery and workforce capability initiatives, and I think this will help give her a broad expertise on leadership development, behavior change, and turning learning into sustained workplace practices. Thanks, Patrice. Next up, we have Cherie Knowles. She is the founder and CEO of HR Knowledge Source. In that role, she brings more than 30 years of HR leadership and advisory experience. And as an advisor, she's going to work with a broad range of organizations with a focus on leadership, culture, and workforce effectiveness. Real excited to hear that external advisor's perspective, especially when it comes to translating cultural initiatives into relatable business outcomes. So great to see you, Cherie. And last but not least, we have Gwen McPherson. She's the Director of Talent Development and Learning at Piedmont Healthcare. She's got many years of developing leaders and organizational capabilities within multiple healthcare organizations. She currently leads the Talent and Learning Development program there at Piedmont. She's an executive coach and also an organizational effectiveness expert. And I think this is going to help her talk about how she can align leadership, culture, and performance. So thanks for joining us, Gwen. Now, to go along with our featured panelists, we also have some subject matter experts here from Eli to add a little additional commentary. As we just heard from Steve, our founder and chair, he's obviously got a great deal of experience, and we're excited for what he can share with us. In addition, we have Paula Garland. She is Eli's Chief Learning and Experience Officer, and she brings 30 years of experience in human resources, organizational development, and instructional design. So we're very excited about that. And then last but not least, I'd like to introduce today's moderator for the panel, and that is Shannon Mapp. She is Eli's Vice President of Client Development and Sales. And in that role, for the past 10 years, she's worked with hundreds of organizations to implement compliance programs that not only help get things legal, but also work towards building civil, respectful, and productive workplaces. And with that, I'll turn it over to Shannon.
Thank you so much, Dave. Welcome, everyone. We're really excited to have you part of the conversation. I'd like to start the discussion today by getting a reaction to the poll results because they show what's top of mind for everyone here. We'll also use those results as a lens for our conversation to touch on three areas that we talked about earlier the current state of workplace culture, what organizations do beyond policies and training, and then how do we connect this work to make measurable impact and organizational performance. So as you see on the screen, the poll results are the top two are tied of or close in with reinforcing behavioral expectations and manager accountability. I'd like to get a quick reaction from the panelists. Just what does this tell you about where organizations are right now? Gwen, can we start with you?
Sure. What this says to me is, first of all, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here today to speak on this panel and to also hear from those that could join us today. It seems like we're all in a similar boat together. Not totally surprised around behavior, expectations, and challenges. And so, regardless of industry or wherever we're located, we are all in this challenge together. That's what immediately came to me.
Perfect. Thank you. Cherie, what stands out for you with these results?
Yeah, I would just add to what Gwendolyn just said because it's almost two sides of the same coin. If organizations are not reinforcing their behavior and leadership accountability, manager accountability, then somewhere down the chain, they're going to miss the mark. And so when I see the results, again, I'm not surprised either. I think all of them are critical priorities, but those two really resonate with me.
Thank you. Yeah. Chris, what about you?
Well, I'm a little disappointed that one of the poll options wasn't everything's great and that wasn't the leader, but since it's not and we're here, I will say this real quick thing, which is this. The first day I was a management person in 1994, my manager at the time gave me one simple instruction, which is walk the walk. If you expect things of people, if you expect to be treated well, if you expect to be shown respect, do the same thing back. And 30 some years later, we're still in a position where I think that is the problem. That's why reinforcing behavioral expectation is still a challenge, is because people are asked to do something they don't see. And boy, I wish that was fixed, but I think it's still addressable. And I think it comes from good leadership.
Very good. And Patrice?
Yeah, definitely not surprised by this. Just reflecting on it, I think people want to do the right thing, but it's those challenges that, Steve spoke about, that people are dealing with so many competing priorities. We're dealing with challenges, with evolving policies and practices. And, I'm thinking of different regional interpretations, with global companies. And so not surprised by it, but I think possibly some of it can lead to cognitive overload because there's just so much that we're having to deal with as leaders in our organizations that sometimes, we want to do the right thing, but sometimes, other things are preventing us from doing that.
So it's layered and complex.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I hear that. And just to take a little bit of a deeper dive, and Steve, you spoke about a lot of this in your intro, but when you think about reinforcing behavioral expectations as being really the number one, definitely connected with manager accountability. I'm just curious, since you have spent your career helping organizations move from legal requirements to these practical behaviors, why do you think these expectations remain so difficult? Anything that you would add to this conversation when we've got the policies in place, we've got guidance in place, but it still is a challenge?
Thanks for that question. Thank you very much, Shannon. The thing that really struck me is if you take a look at, first, if you look at the 3 or 5 things posted, 3 of those are behavioral. And it's basically people aren't behaving the way they want. Now, what's the key is it's not because they don't know. They know. You take a look at the worst case. Think of the worst case you've ever read about individual behavior. I don't recall someone saying, I didn't know I couldn't do that. That's not the problem. They didn't do it. Why don't they do it? People around them do it or ignore it or accept it. It's not reinforced, and behavior is not treated like a business necessity. I'll give you an analogy in healthcare, and Gwendolyn, I'll stop giving them all to you, but these are healthcare. If I were a surgeon and I was pre-med briefly. My wife said I saved more people by not going to medical school than most do going in practice. That's another story. But the key is I could be a great surgeon. I could have everything in place. But if I came to work at Piedmont and I said, I want to work with you, and you say you're hired and start immediately, and I said, great, thank you. I appreciate your giving me the gloves and the mask. I don't like it. I just won't use it. So thanks. You'd say, you got to wear it. And I said, but I'm number one in the class. I know what I'm doing. I don't care. There's certain rules that are non-negotiable. Gloves, masks, they're one of them. But yet, using the healthcare example, there are instances when people's behavior, acting and or not speaking up, kill patients. And I'm just using that as an analogy. I won't do it again. And it's not treated the same way. That's a flaw, and that has to be overcome. And the same analogy works in many other organizations. Treat the way you treat one another as important as any other business urgent necessity, because that is what changes. And that's what I was speaking about. It involves commitment expressed through real behavior, communications, yes, content, consequences that we talked about, and measuring it. You measure sales, you measure safety, same idea.
Yeah. And that actually leads us right into this whole conversation. Is what we are all struggling with. We understand that behavior is what is driving the culture. As we look at our first theme around the current state of the workplace culture, what we see from that poll, what we see from these conversations even so far, is that we're still continuing to have challenges around managing the behavior in the workplace. And even though organizations have the policies and the values and all of these things in place, the gap is there. So in this next section, I want to dig into that a little bit more. And I want to start with Chris, because at an enterprise scale, saying that we need to be consistent across the board is easy to say. It's really hard to actually accomplish, as again, we're all alluding to. But I am curious what you're seeing today that makes the consistent expectations harder to maintain. So really focusing the section on the challenges, and we'll get into some of the strategies in the next section.
Yeah, Shannon, thank you. So I think there's a few different elements that will come together and coalesce when it comes to enterprise-wide consistency. And I think most folks know what they are, but to articulate them, the first one is cultural norms across geographies, right? That is a massive piece of this that's got to be kind of stitched together, because you're really taking whatever your cultural norm is for your organization, your expectations, even your high-level expectations in culture, and you're going to have to translate that across within the U.S. different cultural norms, and then if you go global, it becomes even more complicated. And I'm going to throw in maybe a different wrinkle as well, which is I think that over the last 20 years or so that I've been in this work, I've seen a diminishment of trust of organization. Organizational trust is down. In the political realm, it's down. With corporations, it's down. And the AI transformation that's happening right now, I think we're overblowing some elements of it, but still there's an AI transformation coming here. But that also is actually another issue when it comes to trusting organizations. And I think doing the right thing when it's hard is easier when you trust the organization, and it's harder when you don't. So I look at all of this as kind of becoming a focal point for why we need to be very specific and articulate with our expectations of management in this area.
Real quick as a follow-up, and I'll open it up to the rest of the panelists to chime in on that. Obviously, AI is something we're all leveraging, talking about, and working through in a variety of ways. I don't know that it's always clear. Maybe in this space it might be, but from a business operations side, how AI is intersected with trust and behavior. And I'm curious, Chris, because you mentioned that, how do you bring that together for folks and make that tie?
I think real quickly, I'll just say it's transparency that's going to drive any sort of success in this area. But the truth is that people are in a state of fear right now. There is even the most confident of us don't exactly know what's happening, and some folks thrive in that environment, and many and most don't. And I think the more that you can do to have open conversations, be transparent, be direct, and maybe help guide people to where the future looks like it's going to be. Will help with that, but it is a crisis issue, and I think we need to treat it as such. We need to know we have to work with our folks in different ways to overcome this.
Shannon, I'll add in, before this session, I was talking with a group of leaders and we were talking about, just how are we leveraging AI and how are we using it to really think differently about our work? One of the best examples that someone shared in the session we were in, and I'll use this from a learning and development perspective, thinking about instructional design. There was a study where a person designed X product and then they had AI design it and, gave people an opportunity to give some feedback with regards to how did it look? What do you think? And they were like, it's okay. But then when the person used AI to prompt and to really craft it and to do some iterations on it, that's when it became like an even better product. So it's one of where I would say for leaders, it's a way of where we can embrace it to really think about what are some of the tasks that we can use it for, like, in this meeting, taking notes for you, doing recaps, things of that nature, so that people are always going to be needed, like Gwendolyn, executive coach. She's going to be needed to have those conversations as an executive coach with a person. That's something that AI, is not going to do as well as she can. And so it's really how can we use it to free up capacity to do some other things that can be a bit higher thinking order activities that we need to do. I see someone said, AI is a job replacement. No, but AI is a thought partner. Absolutely, yes. So it's part of it's a mindset shift that's needing to happen. But, Chris, just to go back on your part, as we think about trust, we're very transparent. If we're putting together a presentation and we use an image that was generated by AI, we put a disclaimer, just like, hey, this is an AI image that we use to create this and et cetera. So it's one of those where it's just do I want to spend all day doing a VLOOKUP on a table when AI can do that, Copilot can do that in Excel for me, and then I can go have a conversation with Chris or with, Cherie or Gwen about something, that's going to stimulate thought differently.
Gwen.
Yes, I agree with everything that everyone said. One thing that we're doing here at Piedmont that's a little bit, maybe others are doing the same thing around the AI conversation, is obviously transparency, a lot of education and training and focus groups and pilot groups to learn more, but then also making it crystal clear the expectation is that a human makes the final decision. To use AI, but a human being has to make the final decision. And that's actually in our policy, our AI policy. So organizations having very collaborative steering committees, if you will, around the AI work and workflow and how it's going to be operationalized within the organization, and having a really robust policy in place and communication of that policy expectation is one thing that we're doing differently to just set a standard of it's not going to replace jobs, and a human has to make the final call.
When I think about the workplace and all the degenerations in the workplace right now, and I think about this personally because I have an aunt who is a healthcare worker, and she struggles with the computer technology. And so it sounds fine for us who are, moving in that same wave with AI and technology, but all these organizations, as I think you mentioned, Chris, all of you, it's complex for a variety of reasons. Generationally is another layer. So how do you, and I know this isn't just about AI and behavior, but you're really bringing up some points because job security, fear, trust, all that could be top of mind for somebody who might be in an older generation or a different generation. And then that is informing how they're coming to work and how they might be promoted or how they're showing up. So it's a lot there to unpack, but I'm just curious for the panel, reaction to that and thoughts around how you're managing it for fairness across the organization.
Well, I'll go real quickly as others formulate their thoughts, and that is, Shannon. For as long as I've known you, I think it's fair to say that we've had generational issues across all aspects of civil behavior, right?
Right.
And one of the reasons is because the world changes. And I do think there is a general, and being of advanced age myself, I know that there's a hardening, and it takes additional effort that maybe that I don't have time for necessarily to keep abreast of all these things. So whether it's civil behavior and what constitutes uncivil behavior, or whether it's a piece of what kind of technology I'm using some technology regardless of age, but what I'm comfortable with. I think that it just boils down to having open conversation. I think with generations, the expectations don't get to change just because of your generational gap. I don't change my expectations of the Zoomers the same way I don't change my expectations of the baby boomers just because of where they are. We're working together, and I think that consistency and that openness about that consistency is what will drive kind of a collected, team-oriented understanding.
What about from a talent management and talent development perspective then? We do want to have the same expectations across the board, but that could also mean we're considering the development based on different groups, or just wondering if that comes into play at all with this.
Not really for what I've seen in global
Okay.
companies. It's more so thinking of future skills and then also thinking of like what are those core behaviors. So future skills for everyone, no matter where you are generationally in the business, um, you'll see things around like data and digital, and AI and all of that's a part of it. And then also thinking of, the storytelling, the business acumen. So it's more so skills that are appropriate for everyone in the organization, no matter what generation you may be a part of.
Okay. Okay. Sherry, I want to ask you a question. Because of the work that you do with executives in a variety of organizations, going back to culture and behavior, where do you find they're landing with their connection between that and workplace behavior being part of business performance?
Yeah, I think there are two things that really strike me that come to mind. And one ties back to the poll around manager accountability.
Mm,
Um, I think that most executives that I've worked with, and I've been in HR inside the house too for a very long time, have an expectation that managers solely enforce the culture. But part of what they're missing is that managers actually have to translate the culture.
mm,
So they need to be what I call bilingual, right? They need to be able to speak strategy, speak executive, but translate that to their teams. And so it has to happen in real time, like really in situations where no one has trained them to act in the moment. In the policies that we write, procedures, our core values, every expectation that is communicated from senior leadership kind of has to pass through what I think I would call the murky middle. The manager has to figure out how to make that real for the employee. And when there's no script for how to have the tough but necessary
yeah.
conversations or how to manage competing priorities that we heard earlier,
Mhm.
the managers get a little bit stuck. And going back to what Steve said, it's not because they don't want to, is sometimes they just get jammed up in my words. And I think executives think that they've done an excellent job of communicating. And yes, they've started, but that's not the end story. So that's one thing that really stands out to me. The second thing, in terms of making that connection between behavior and business performance, what I've seen is executives don't always make the connection until it becomes really expensive, like it's hitting a financial measure, a bottom line, or too much expense. And what I mean by that, the expense shows up in initiatives and projects that don't get across the finish line, spikes in actual attrition and turnover, so people leaving, but also spikes in what I call motivational attrition. People stay, but they're not giving their best effort. They're not doing their best work.
Right.
And maybe that engagement survey score that nobody wants to look at anymore or talk about out loud. So then all of a sudden, everyone is looking at HR saying, what happened?
Mhm.
And I think what happened long before it popped into the HR
Yeah.
office. It was in the behavior that got tolerated, that people talked about, but nothing was done. It was in the expectations that weren't reinforced or clearly communicated. It was with the managers who didn't have a hard conversation for 6 months that needed to be had, right? So it's showing up in that way. And I think the disconnect, or executives maybe treat it almost like a climate or a temperature issue. So something you're monitoring, but you're not necessarily managing it. And I agree. Steve said this earlier, and you said it too, Shannon. Workplace behavior is a business necessity. It's a business performance variable. So it's going to show up in how fast teams execute, how they get things done, how people bring their best thinking forward and contribute or feel great about the ability to contribute, and whether people stay and give it their all, or whether they're staying and quietly looking. And so what I've seen organizations who get it right, don't wait for the data to tell the story. They're connecting the dots like on the front end. So that's where I see in terms of the connectivities, manager accountability, but also that connection between culture and business performance.
Love that. Thank you for that. Absolutely. Yes. Thumbs up. Steve, I see you've got your hand up. I'm going to turn it over to you. And this is actually a great transition into the next theme where we do talk about moving beyond policies and training. So we'll take your comment and transition to that.
I'm sorry, I've got to continue one more healthcare example. I've got lots of others, but this one comes to mind. One of the things that happens is that when a lot of organizations tend to explain their standards, but they don't make it clear why they matter. And if you're going to change somebody's behavior, people will change because they want to, or they have to, or they won't change. So they might say, you can't scream and you can't yell, until there was an article published, not about Hospital X, but another hospital, where the chief administrative officer, a physician I know, said, we lost a patient because of this. The patient died because of this. That's why we're doing it. And you've got to make it matter. There can be positive reinforcement, or you can say negative reinforcement, but it matters just like wearing that mask and the gloves. That has to be clear to people, or they won't change because other people tolerate it. That's another factor.
And it sounds like these are issues based on the poll, this discussion, and the clients that we talk to and work with. As we said, we're all dealing with it. We have been, and we want to support the managers and the organization to be able to walk the walk and show up in the way that translates those values. And so as we look at moving beyond policies and training, because we know that those are necessary, but changing behavior, as Steve just said, takes more than that. So what are the strategies that you do at your organization to really help support managers in that? I want to start with Patrice, looking at the global side of your organization, but the complexities, whether it's functions, teams, and I don't even think you have to, every organization is complex within their own space. And so, but for you, where you sit with Coca-Cola, what helps move your message from that theoretical to the application?
Yeah, great question. And I've been reading in the chat and seeing some themes that people have been talking about. And it is the consistency, but then it's also you need some modeling. And when I speak of the modeling, you think about it's no secret. You guys go out and look and see that we're going through a shift from one CEO who's with us for several years into a new CEO. And so as we're making that transition and making that shift, it's really thinking about, okay, what is the culture going to be with this leader and the organization? And then what are his definitions as we think about what it means to be a leader at Coca-Cola in this time? And so a lot of work is happening because we had those expectations before. They were a part of our leadership and development and capability programs where everything is anchored in that about this, again, providing that clarity and that consistency of this is what it means to be a leader. These are the expectations, because as we bring in new people to the organization, that's often a question we hear. My team hears in onboarding. It's like, people want to know, again, they want to do the right thing and they want to know what are the expectations of leaders, in this particular organization and what are those requirements of me as a person that's taking on this leadership role. And so part of it is, yes, we have the capability programs and those are great. I call them sometimes puppy dipping. It's wonderful to have these global programs where you take people and they go through the programs and it's like, this is great. And then they go back to an environment that maybe doesn't support it, that maybe isn't as civil as it should be. And so it's that challenge sometimes for people to not revert back to those old ways. And so part of it is, providing that scaffolding to support them, to thinking of supporting them through coaching and other interventions as they're returning to the workplace to really help them as they're being those leaders to help really draw that culture change and shift that we want.
Wonderful. Anybody have something to add to modeling? What else are we doing? Gwen, I see you come off mute.
Yes, I love what Patrice just said, the scaffolding, right? And putting that infrastructure into place to make sure it's just not a one and done. Or you said the puppy analogy. I thought that was really, really cute. And I think we've done the same. We've taken a similar approach here at Piedmont. One thing a lot of things I can speak to, but the one thing I want to highlight is that infrastructure and scaffolding of not from orientation and onboarding all the way throughout. So partnering with both clinical and non-clinical teams to make sure we have a seamless and a simultaneously consistent messaging and experience has been huge for us. So my team, talent development and learning, majority of us are non-clinical, but we partner heavily with our clinical teams in our RN residency programs, in our safety coaching programs. We have over 700 safety coaches across the state. And so, for example, that infusion and collaboration of making sure we're all kind of talking and walking the same or similar walk and talk. So whether you are a new employee coming on board or you're a current employee, you're still receiving that same experience over and over again. I've often laughed and joked and said, the one thing about our team is we touch the employee throughout the life cycle from, onboarding and then all the way throughout all the time with compliance training and leadership training and development, executive training and development, coaching. So we touch folks all the way throughout. So there's just an amazing opportunity to partner with so many people here, so many teams here, even our external facing teams, because we recently had a speak with our leadership teams to explain this. We are the largest employer for patient services for Georgia, 55,000 within the state. And so the reality is not most, but many of our patients are also our employees. And because we're so large. So if you are a employee here, most likely you or your family member or a neighbor will touch a Piedmont facility at some point in time. So it only behooves us to treat each other well, have a strong culture of trust, and have a strong patient-centered approach in how we are treating each other and how we show up, because it's just all connected. So that infrastructure and scaffolding that you mentioned is just, it's exactly how we've tried to live out loud here as well.
Chris, I want to ask you a question. Because you still have a sense of urgency and heightened priorities with UPS. It's a different level, but I know the work there. And what we talk about a lot is all of what you said, Patrice and Gwen, are great. But I want to dig into the moment that's happening. Like in the moment a manager is dealing with a behavioral issue, with all the other pressures happening, what are your thoughts around how to support them, what they need? What is UPS doing in that regard?
Yeah, I think when you think about what the manager needs in the moment, let's define the table stakes. Like they have to have an understanding of the culture. We believe through our process of promotion or selection that these folks want to do the right thing. And they've probably got a toolkit of some variety that walks them through a tough conversation. So let's leave that all aside as table stakes. What I really think makes the differentiation in a good culture is when the manager has to make that tough decision, is it easier to make the right decision than the wrong decision? In other words, are you going to do the thing that is hard but right, or the thing that's bad but easy, right? And while I know that the circumstances are never going to be exactly right, the good right thing is never going to be the easiest. I think it behooves us to support the manager by making the harder thing that's right as easy as possible. And what are some examples of that? Well, one thing is, let's pretend that I have to make a decision that could end someone's employment or at least suspend their employment. An organization that cares and supports an individual will say, you make that decision and we'll get you the help you need to get through that thing. If your organization isn't going to do that, now not only am I worried about the conflict of this conversation and the hard thing of having to do this, but now I'm also thinking, well, I'm going to have to pick up that work while they're gone too, right? So in other words, I think an organization that's mature about this supports the people and makes it easier, if not easy, easier to do the right thing. And that's a great sign of an organization that's doing the right thing.
Mm-hmm. And I would imagine the support that's required is very layered, for sure, in that. And even what Patrice and Gwen, you're talking about with the safety managers, you've got a variety of layers in support so that the managers aren't just looking up maybe to their leader. That's fine too, but how critical have you seen that being in part of what makes this all work, is expanding your branches across the organization, if you will? I would imagine it does, but any reaction to that?
Yeah, it's one of where, people are not alone. It's the mindset of like,
Yeah.
get help, get help, Chris's group thinking of employee relations or, their HR business partner, another leader. It's the get help so that, as Chris mentioned, you are not going through this alone. You are going to have the help and the support that you need, and it's available globally. So thinking of, yes, what we have in Atlanta and in the United States, but then also thinking globally of, as leaders, I have people on my team all over the world, and we have help and people that can support you in those, situations where you do, those unfortunate conversations when it does become that time, but get help. That's the big thing that we want to remind people to do is just, you do not have to do this by yourself.
So this kind of transitions a little bit to the next theme, but we won't go there. I think ending this or wrapping this up with some thoughts on, for people in the audience who don't have all this infrastructure, if you will, in place and the scaffolding, and where would be the top, one or two, three things that would be a critical place to start for them, or some advice that you would give them as they're looking to build more of that support within the organizations for managers?
I'll offer one thing, and very clearly, I would make the case to my senior leadership that they should start talking about behavior. They should start talking about the expectations verbally out front. Maybe you can't get it into your earnings releases, but anytime that leader's in front of folks, talk about what you expect from your leaders' behaviors. And we have a piece here we call "Not in Our House." We have behaviors that we do not want to see, and we are all over the place with it. And I think our senior leadership statements in those veins really helped us get it kicked off.
To add on to what Chris is saying there, 100% agree. Start with your executive team, your senior leadership team, and around behaviors. And also, if you don't already have something in place, to highlight what's working well and what behaviors we are celebrating and what behaviors are proven to be exemplary. That's also equally as important. We do a lot of that, obviously, in healthcare, because we are in the business of saving lives. And so we highlight that a ton. And I think it also helps to reinforce, this is who we are. This is our culture. This is what we're about. And it also, I think, empowers our leaders, and not just our leaders, but a culture of accountability toward each other, to be able to say, this is who we are. Here are real life examples of how we need to show up every single day.
So I see you off mute, Sheree, and I see Paula's hand up. Sheree, I'll go to you, and then Paula will wrap up with you.
Yeah, I was going to say for the organizations that might be limited on resources, whether it is access to information, staff, budget,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
start small, but the key is to start.
Mm-hmm.
And two things that you could do tomorrow is to pull a group of leaders that you feel are demonstrating the behaviors that are living your culture and your values and create a think tank. Let's have a mastermind conversation about what makes it easier for them to demonstrate that and really start to build from there. So
Mm-hmm.
use the wisdom that's already in your organization. And like everyone else said, have hard conversations with your executive team. They probably think they have a great culture. They probably think it's going well. And you might be the one to say, maybe, but it could go better, right? So
Mm-hmm.
be courageous and just start somewhere. So you don't have to start big.
Mm-hmm. I like that. Thank you. Paula.
So here's the reality. We have all been relating to other people for as long as we've been on this earth. And so somehow it seems that people think that because we've been relating to people all this time, that we don't necessarily need to focus on it and be intentional about it.
Interesting.
But the reality is that's not really the case. And so when you're looking at something like this, we've been talking about changing behavior now for almost an hour. And it's clearly a strategic issue that we're having in organizations. And so even if you have to start small, I love that, Cherie, because that you're right, you have to start somewhere, but you have to be intentional about it. I think about what happens in marketing as an example. For marketers, when they're getting a message out there, they don't rely on putting the message out once through one channel or one moment and assuming that any behavior on this part of the customer is going to change. They build a sequence of touch points that are intentional, that keep the message visible, relevant, and actionable. Learning has to work the same way. If we're teaching people or we're giving people expectations that we want them to meet from a behavioral perspective, and we want them to develop new habits, they need repeated opportunities to recognize the behavior, practice it, and apply it. So even if you, just like a marketing company or a marketing division would create some kind of a small content strategy around a campaign that they're doing, it's really important to identify those few critical behaviors that are essential to the success of the business and find ways to make it easier for people to remember them and easier to use them or apply them when it really matters. So again, don't think that just because you've been relating to people all your life that it's necessarily always going to be easy, especially based upon everything that everyone said so far about all the challenges that we're facing today.
Mm-hmm. That's very fair point. Anything else from the panel? Okay. I want to move into the how because this all sounds great. And we know there's a challenge because we're still challenged with it for a variety of reasons. It's not just getting senior leadership buy-in or for the organization to see behavior as important. And I get that. But that is a problem, a piece of this puzzle to help solve for. And so I think that when we look at really positioning HR as being a support function for the organization in the way that it helps it perform, and establishing HR as being connected to the work that the company and the organization is doing. This is this last section and this last theme of how, and I think that is really going to be helpful for the audience to get some practical things that they can use, some examples of what you're doing, but how do you, for example, Chris, get senior leaders to talk about it all the time? What are some of the strategies that you do to work up within the organization to make it important to them to be able to accomplish that?
I think one of the best things we did was train our senior leaders. Like we actually worked through them with the same training that we were going to give to everyone else.
Mm-hmm.
And I think their clear understanding of the expectations that they theoretically espoused, but got to see in a very practical way, helped a lot with getting that rolling cascade of messaging down throughout. But I do think one offering that I would have, and maybe we'll talk about other things later, but one offering I would have here is that civil behavior, expectations, these things change as your career progresses. The expectations around a supervisor's role is very different than the expectations around a director's role. So I just want to make sure that whatever you choose to do, understand that you're embarking on an ongoing initiative, not a we did this in 6 months, we corrected behavior. And in fact, many of the corrections of behavior are going to be lagging indicators, and you're going to have other leading indicators and data that you want to monitor as you're getting to a better workplace.
Who else has a reaction to that, or some how putting all this into practice, some strategies to really help align the culture, compliance, and performance of the organization? Go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't see you off
Yeah,
mute.
that's okay. Just to echo what Chris is saying, that another piece just to keep in mind is being flexible and being able to pivot. For example, we talked a lot about AI, and one thing we really didn't say out loud is this culture we're all dealing with, I'm sure, around social media and how that behavior in the workplace has, at least in our environment, has totally exploded almost. It creates a different sense of reality for folks, and the behaviors demonstrated certainly tell us that story. So we've had to pivot and focus a little bit more on just grounding and what's really appropriate in the workplace. And this is not you're not on a reality TV show. This is real life. This is real world. So let's hold it together, guys. So just being able to be flexible, you got to pivot sometimes, most times, and just know that whatever is the hot button, the leading indicators, try to have those measurements or pieces in place so that you're getting that feedback fast if you can, and adjusting accordingly.
Sheree, yes.
Yeah, I was going to say, I love what you both just said. And what I've seen, I've had the privilege of working across industries, different clients. And one thing, when they're doing it well, they have stopped expecting HR to be the only ones that carry the culture out loud. And to Chris's point about training, I think sometimes culture often lands in HR's lap because no one else steps up to claim it. And it becomes this less than tangible thing, and it is something that can be measured, it can be managed. And organizations who do it well, like senior leaders, make culture visible in their own words. So they get to say it, they get to mention it in meetings, they get to tie it to celebrating business outcomes, they get to tie it to when expectations are not met. And here's the thing. People are always watching leaders, whether they're middle managers up to senior leaders. And the moment that they do or don't do or say or don't say something, the employees are going to interpret that and take that as your perspective on your culture. And so I've seen leaders who get it right really make it a sustainable, organic part of who they are. And one tip, you were asking for something practical, a strategy. We've worked with leaders that incorporate performance expectations around the culture. So it is not just the leader who can't hit every target and, leave a trail of disengaged employees along the way. Like, they are managed against both. And just like anybody else, leaders focus on what they're managed on, what they're measured on, just like everyone else. So I think that's a practical strategy that someone could try.
Very good. Thank you for that, Paula.
Yeah, just to put an exclamation point, Sheree, in what you're saying in terms of behavior and organizations treating behavior as a strategic business outcome. You had mentioned that it isn't just an HR function or an HR responsibility, and that's absolutely right. It has to be part of the fabric of the rewards and recognition of everyone in the organization. The shift has to change ownership beyond just L&D, HR, and talent, or even just compliance, because operational leaders have to help own the outcome because they shape the environment where the behavior either happens or it doesn't happen. And so for so long, we think that some of these initiatives, and especially the type of learning that we offer, a lot of times ends up in human resources or compliance or DE&I or some other area like that, or culture. But really, it's the leadership in those frontline organizations that have such a critical role, and they have to be an owner as well as the senior leadership does.
Mm-hmm. I was actually going to come to you anyway, Paula, about measurement. I know you've done a lot of work around this, and I think we have as well across the panelists. But can you talk a little bit about leveraging measurement, survey data, information like that to really help drive the point about behavior and making an impact to the culture and the organization's performance?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of times, again, with the type of training that we focus on primarily, a lot of times it falls under the bucket of a compliance, right? And when you're thinking about compliance, what are people most concerned about? Completions, right? Mm-hmm. Completions are what are used as kind of the holy grail of training measurement in a lot of cases. But we can't just focus on completion rates. As we're talking about behavioral change in our world, what we are most concerned about is not just that people attend the training, but to making sure that the environment, and Chris, this is something you talked about, making sure that the environment in which they're going back to is supportive and is allowing them to try out what they've learned and to make mistakes in a safe space. We have to be able to set up that environment and create that learning culture where there is continuous learning, continuous conversation about what's going on. And if you're doing all of those things, you want to create an operationalized measurement system that checks for changes in behaviors. And you can do that. We do it through leveraging survey data that our clients already have. For example, in a lot of cases, we can go to engagement surveys. We have a set of core competencies, behavioral competencies related to respect, accountability, teamwork, and engagement that we can map to a lot of the engagement survey data that's out there to help you to look at the perspective of behavior and how it's showing up and where it's becoming a root cause in a lot of the things that are happening in the organization. So you can look for practical indicators like that, but what you really want to do is, again, just do something. If you have taken the time to identify a few critical behaviors across the organization or across the team or the division or the department or whatever that you feel are absolutely critical to business success, you want to make sure that you are focusing on those behaviors. You've clearly communicated what they look like. You have a way to check in to make sure that people are applying them or modeling them from the top of the organization all the way through. You want to think about whether or not you have a safe space for people to speak up when things don't go the way that you expect them to go. And if someone does speak up because they're not seeing a behavior that you have identified, is a leader welcoming that concern and receiving it in a way that's positive for the person who brings it to them and making sure that they address the issues timely. So when you're measuring, those are the kinds of things that you can measure. You can measure for accountability, for speaking up, addressing concerns. You can use survey data, such as your engagement surveys, thinking about those competencies or those behaviors that you want to change, and look for places where you see hints of whether or not those behaviors are in action or not. Mm-hmm. Those are kind of the practical steps. Mm-hmm. A lot of time we think measurement is really complex, and it can be if you're trying to isolate the effects of a training event to something that's going on in the organization. But the last thing that I'll say about it, and this is absolutely critical, if you really want to get people on board with this, as we find, you have to be able to clearly vocalize or describe how the changes in those behaviors is going to impact a critical strategic initiative or goal in the organization. And if the senior leadership, the mid-level leaders, the frontline leaders don't really understand that, and they're responsible for owning the changes in behavior, it's going to be really hard to measure it and see it actually happen.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you for that insight, Paula. Chris, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, I'd like to add a little bit to what Paula said, and I'm going to be very real with everyone with the next thing I'm going to say, so be prepared. But I saw Melanie's question about toxic workplaces, how do you support this? How do you create a speak up culture, and how do you do all this in an organization where get help is not the standard? In fact, it sounds like it's rugged individualism is the standard. And this next part is the part where I'm going to be very real. Paula gave all the correct answers when it comes to measuring truly the training that you deliver to folks. But I think there's also taking the measure of your organization. And I think in many cases, you need a visual consequence for the bad behavior, right? You can't just talk about it. At some point, if you have toxicity, if you have bad behavior, if it's visible, especially if you start getting into senior leadership ranks, the organization has got to take action. So if I'm in a situation where I'm fighting a toxic culture without a support matrix, I'm convincing senior leadership that severe action has got to be taken if we're going to change this. Otherwise, we've accepted what's here and we can just go ahead and send everything else down the river because no one's going to believe us anyway. So,
no, that's true. And I think you're right, taking the poll, looking at what you really have and then making moves based on that. And so I think that's helpful. Patrice, can I just ask you, I know we've gotten into some measurement and some other things, but when it comes to learning for leaders who are focused on business priorities, how do you make it matter to them? What are some of the strategies that you've used that get them to connect?
I've seen it happen differently across the globe. Give you an example. One of our operating units, the leader she was very passionate. The president of this operating unit was very passionate around this leadership initiative is going to be a priority for everyone, in our company. I don't care if you are new or if you've been a leader for 100 years, everyone needs to go through this initiative because we want to be intentional about the culture of our operating unit and change. Fast forward a couple of years down the road, this operating unit won a competition that we have within the company to be the best. And they won like the grand prize. Everyone was recognized. But you think about everyone will look and say gradually or suddenly, like, oh, suddenly they won, this particular prize. But in reality, it's those gradual, intentional initiatives and changes that this leader put in place that led to this win. They didn't see 3 years ago when, in the middle of her town hall meeting, she stood up and said, this is going to be a requirement, and these are the expectations for all leaders. Okay. And so, my group is like, okay, great, let's do it. I mean, did it take reporting? Absolutely. Did it take, the communication not only with, her office and the managers and our different HR partners, we had to offer more sessions, et cetera. But it was one of those shared goals, and you can see the result from it, just coming down the road. In some of the other areas, we've seen it where, yeah, if people come, it's great. It's not a require, and you hate to make things a requirement. I mean, we're adults, we all have free will, but it's one of those where, yes, she made it a requirement, but then she was reinforcing it in the culture, and those expectations that she had for her ELT, and then just really trickling it down in the organization. So that's one where, 3 years and then, wow, people may ask, how did they get here where this operating unit won this prize of being the best? And it's everything. And not only did they, you think about the leaders, but then also their performance improved. Chris talked about, the trust that's there and how they are able to solve conflict and do work and et cetera. They all had that same vision about what they wanted to accomplish.
Yeah. So I think that's a really good point too. I mean, one, absolutely senior leadership buy-in and involvement intentionally, and two, this takes time.
It does.
It really takes time, and it takes those small continuous movements forward on things and the focus to be able to do that. So thank you for bringing that point up. We are coming. Oh, Steve, you've got your hand up. We'll go to you, Steve, real quick for a response. And we're actually coming to the end of the panel discussion. We'll do one quick round of a rapid close question, but I'll take your comment before I do that, Steve.
Let me be anonymous. One of my colleagues' firms that I have worked with, I remember it was about more than 20 years ago. and it was out of the state of Georgia. And this person running this division of this wonderful company got up in front of his team, and he was the CEO of this division of a wonderful product that we still consume fairly regularly that's non-alcoholic. And the person said, if you want to work in our division here, you are not going to do certain things. You're not going to do any of the things that create discriminatory environments. And he was very specific. And you're going to act if you find out about problems. And you're going to work these things out and you're going to pass it on. And it reminded me of one of the movies you've heard, Are We Clear? And I sat there thinking, Crystal, I am. It's very clear. And that person's comments, so direct and plain, short language, stuck with me. And I know it had an impact on that part of the organization.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And that is what it's required. Yeah, thank you. So let's wrap this up, and we'll go to the participants for some Q&A. But before we do that, in one sentence, if possible, what is one thing leaders should stop treating as an HR initiative and start treating as an operating discipline? I know we've talked about quite a few today, so however you want to leave this panel with one thought around that. Patrice, would you like to go first? Okay.
Yes, absolutely. Two things popped into my mind. One is well-being. I was chatting with someone about it in the chat. Gwendolyn, I'm looking at you and just thinking of it. People often will say, oh, HR needs to do an initiative on blank well-being, but it's those intentional things that you do every day that contribute to well-being. So that's one where it's everyone's responsibility.
Absolutely. Chris.
This is one area of business where appealing to people's better nature is still the best path forward. So I think that the one thing I would say is be good. Like, that's it. Be passionate about being good.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Cherie, I'm sorry, I saw you come off mute and I called Chris. Go ahead. What's your response?
Yeah, well, first of all, Chris, I love that. So thank you for saying that. I would say accountability, go back to leadership and management accountability. The most expensive culture failures that I've seen, someone saw it coming, but they didn't feel comfortable speaking up. And the moment this becomes an HR process, a PIP, or a facilitated conversation in HR, the management accountability is already lost. And so, Paula, you talked about like reinforcing the message. We have to continuously tell people that water is wet and that accountability is a leadership behavior. So that's what I would leave us with.
We're getting tons of nuggets in this discussion. Thank you. Gwen.
Of course, I was gonna say well-being, but I won't harp on that. The other thing I want to just say is appreciation, because sometimes we find in our culture where it's the HR's job to do something around appreciation. It's HR's job. Y'all figure it out for all of us. And the culture should be, it's everybody's responsibility to show appreciation, especially for your teams. And you don't need an HR mandate to do it. You can be creative in your own way and have fun and celebrate your teams. And the more I have found, the more I show appreciation and we celebrate and we have a good time. I always apologize because we're the loudest in the office. We have a good time. The more that we just have a better camaraderie, and that builds trust, and that builds better relationships, and that also builds people who are not even on my team coming to say, hey, can I talk to you for a second? And that's their way of speaking up. And so sometimes it feels heavy on my shoulders, but I wouldn't have it any other way because I enjoy the folks I get to work with and I care about them so much. And so if we can show appreciation as leaders, genuine, authentic appreciation, I think it could change the way we see each other and how we connect.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great. I love that, the positive aspect of the work that we're talking about and the culture, and that's definitely there. And I appreciate everyone's insight and discussion today. And clearly, all of these themes, we could probably have our own panel on and take even deeper dives into these topics. So really scratching the surface, but still uncovering some good nuggets and takeaways, I hope, for the audience. So I appreciate everyone's insights today. I am going to hand it over to Dave because I think we're going to do a Q&A and another poll.
Indeed, indeed. Thank you, everyone. That was so insightful. And there's just, like Shan said, there's so many really strong takeaways there. I mean, the big things that I saw were how crucial it is to support your leadership, both strategically and then practically, tactically, giving them the tools that they need to achieve what you need them to do to be true leaders when it comes to culture. Being very intentional in setting your culture and establishing the boundaries for it, establishing the results that you want to achieve, articulating what being successful with your culture can lead to. Speaking to the business impact, I think is crucial. And then lastly, really articulating the consequences and making them real so that people aren't just, it's not just an intangible. There's a real accountability factor that may not exist because people think civility is a soft skill. So all great insights, and thank you very much, everyone. Shannon is right. We do want to post one real quick poll question for the audience here before we move forward. There we go. Now, while folks are looking at this, I'm going to kick over to the chat for the questions. This first one is from Victor, and I really like how this is worded. Discipline is a series of intentional behaviors, and lack thereof is the challenge. How do we align or modify behaviors to achieve the desired outcomes with regards to your culture? Who'd like to answer that?
Could you read that one more time?
Sure, no worries. It says discipline is a series of intentional behaviors. That's one definition of the word discipline. And the lack thereof, the lack of intentional behaviors is the challenge. So how do you align or modify those behaviors to achieve the desired outcomes? And otherwise, how do you create those intentional behaviors in a sequence or in response to a certain circumstance?
I think you have to start with your executive team. I think what Chris said earlier is huge. It's where you have to just start there, because if you don't have alignment, it's going to be challenging, to say the least, to try to infiltrate in the middle. I think you have to really, with something like this, you have to start at the top and get an agreed upon understanding around behavior and culture and what we will tolerate and what we won't tolerate, and then kind of build from there. I really think you have to just kind of start there and have those hard conversations.
Chris?
Thank
you, Gwen. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think discipline has a core element that isn't reflected in the question, but is the answer to the question, which is it's got to be consistency. You can't change culture or establish culture if it's a lottery about who gets disciplined or who gets rewarded, etc. Your whole approach has got to be as disciplined as possible. We have almost 500,000 people in our organization. This is a challenge. We're just huge, but our North Star on this is consistency.
Good point. Excellent. Okay. I see another good question here. Scroll back to it. How should organizations normalize get help? I think this goes back to what Chris touched on early. When unwritten norms or traditions of the organization don't support it. In other words, how do you encourage a speak up culture? If we dive a little bit more into that.
I think as leaders, it's important to role model it and to use examples of where you're comfortable saying, hey, I didn't know what to do in this particular situation, so I had to reach out and get help. And hearing that from you as the leader of your team, but then also with senior leaders, being comfortable in saying examples of where they've had to reach out and to get help. It's one where some modeling is definitely important there, but then also it's being intentional about what is that culture you want to build within your organization. And culture, it takes a while. It's not going to happen like overnight, but just being intentional about what is that culture and just thinking of the environment of we call it psychological safety. It's like, hey, this is a safe space. I'm going to ask for some help here because I am not sure of what to do. I'm coming to you because I need help. This is my intent.
I like that. Anyone else?
Yeah, I would add on to that and just say the messaging really is vulnerability does not equate to weakness. And those two things don't they are not closely aligned. So being vulnerable is actually a sign of strength because you recognized and you're self-aware. So having to, even if you're starting slowly to plant those seeds, I think that you'll see something take root and grow. But I loved what Patrice just said.
Indeed. Good point. Good point. The next question. Our HR team appreciates the role of a positive workplace culture, yay, but we struggle with getting leadership to appreciate it. Something tells me that's not as isolated as perhaps we would all hope it would be. How can we enlist leadership support in formally addressing workplace behaviors?
I'll just suggest this. Tie it to what they care about. So if a manager is losing some sleep over attrition, then let's not talk about employee engagement scores. Let's talk about the cost of losing people and when the team is in disrepair and things like that. So really talk about what they care about, but align it to workplace behavior and culture. So that's my suggestion.
Good point. All right, another good question here, and it's a little more specific.
Dave, before you get
Behaviors
to
are
that,
especially challenging during reorganizations. What advice can you provide for maintaining levelness and centeredness and progressively keep things moving forward? I think another way to frame that would be as to what advice would you give in terms of an approach to managing your culture and your standards during a period of major transition like a merger or an acquisition?
I would say on the onset, going in with setting expectations and around culture and what it means to become a part of this new thing, and over communicate, over communicate, over communicate. And when you think you have said it, say it again, and show up in this from the space of whatever it is you're trying to bring forward within this merger or acquisition. We've gone through a lot of acquisitions over the years, and the one thing I try to make sure our teams understand is no one should ever feel like we came in, we took the name off the building, took away a badge, threw up Piedmont, and gave them a new badge and said, good luck, you know. So we have to show up and show up again and time again and reinforce it and communicate over and over communicate. And communicate not just verbally, you know, non-verbally and in every different way we can get them infused in. Use your technology. It can be a great friend to get folks connected fast. And always do those check-ins with them to see how is it really going. Are we moving too fast? What extra support can we give you? Where are the gaps? But checking in and making sure that those new team members are acclimating quite as nice as they can into the organization.
Thank you. That's very thorough. Appreciate that. We're running out of time for the Q&A. I do have two more things. First, China, if you could post the link. We have a link for a survey that we'd appreciate everyone taking a moment to complete if possible. And then I'd also like to turn it back over to Steve Paskoff for some parting words.
This has been a great session. I appreciate what our client panelists and friend panelists have delivered and hearing from everyone here. I think a lot of this comes down to the fact of this. When we're talking about working with people and driving change, I wish we could say we could give people the rules and they will automatically change. Let's just remember there are lots of rules outside of the workplace that we know about what we should and shouldn't do. And that knowledge doesn't make us perfect, all of us. And we still have stories every day outside of the workplace. And the same is true here. You've got to have a few core rules that are driven and in a way that motivates. Your leaders motivate change through their own actions that can be positive and corrective. And this has got to be repeated so that it becomes new habits. we quickly, all of us who can remember, and I think most of us can remember, the last time that you could run to the airport and go straight to the gate without pausing or waiting. And does anyone remember the day when that all changed? Quickly. And it changed because something happened that motivated us in September of 2001, and quickly we all changed. That's not what we need to have happening. Forbid that. But we have to make motivation positive and or corrective. It's got to be sustained and reinforced and talked about as frequently as sales, safety, quality, and productivity. And that starts with commitment of the organization.
Great, great. Thank you so much, Steve. Good words indeed. And that formally wraps up our program today. A couple of quick parting notes. First and foremost, thank you so much to our panelists for all the insights that they shared, for taking the time to take so much experience and perspective and to share it with us in such a practical manner. Thank you to Shannon and Paul and Steve for their help in supporting it with some additional insights. And thank you in the audience for taking time out to join us. We really appreciate you taking that time. We'll be following up with you. We'll send an email to everyone with a link to a recording of this so that you can watch it again or share it with any colleagues who may not have been able to join us today. We'll also have a link to the survey. In that survey, there's a comment form field, and we ask that you share any thoughts about maybe what you want to hear on a future forum, because we do want to continue this. We think it's very valuable to sort of put the hive mind together and bring all this experience together and share it with you guys and help figure out how we can all work together to help our organizations create civil, respectful, and productive workplaces for all. So thank you for participation today, and we look forward to seeing you again. Have a great day, everyone.